Wyoming Territory, late October of 1876. The wind cut low and sharp through the wagon yard outside Rollins, carrying with it the scent of dry sage and coal smoke, and enough chill to make any man or woman feel the loneliness of the plains. Franklin Elridge had just unsaddled his tired gelding when he saw her. She was curled up against a broken wagon wheel, tucked into the shadows between two freight wagons. Her dress was dusty and worn thin at the seams, her boots too big for her feet. She had no blanket, no coat, and her arms were wrapped tight around her ribs like she was trying to hold herself together. The lantern light from the livery flickered just enough for Franklin to see her face young, maybe 20, and pale from cold. Her breath came in shallow puffs, and she didn't stir when a gust swept grit over her skirt. He walked over, slow and quiet. "Miss?" he asked gently. She startled awake, jerking upright. Her eyes were wide, brown, and full of fear. She looked ready to run. Frank slipped the blanket off his shoulder and held it out. "You look frozen. Take this." She blinked at it, then back at him. I am fine." "No, you're not," he said. "You're out here with no coat and it's going to drop below freezing soon. I ain't gonna hurt you. Just want you warm." She hesitated, then took the blanket with trembling hands. "Thank you." He crouched, careful not to crowd her. "You alone out here?" She nodded, hugging the blanket around her shoulders. "My name is Maribeth Turner. I came west with my brother and his wife. They left 2 weeks ago, said I was too much burden." Frank's jaw clenched. "They left you out here?" Maribeth looked down. "I had no money. They took the wagon when I was in town. I came back and they were gone." He looked at her a long moment. "You been sleeping here since then?" "I did odd work at the boarding house for a few days, but they said I had to move on. I have nowhere else." Frank stood up, ran a hand through his hair. "Come with me." She shrank back. "Where?" "There's a fire in the livery and coffee. I will sit far on the other side if it makes you feel safer. But you cannot stay out here tonight." Her eyes searched his face, and whatever she saw there, may be the calm in his voice, or the steadiness of his eyes, made her nod. He led her through the gate to the livery. The warmth inside hit her like a wall. Frank tossed down a few logs on the fire. She settled near it, shivering hard now that the cold was releasing its grip. He poured her a tin cup of coffee. "Here." She took it with both hands. "You did not have to do this." "I know," he said. "But I wanted to." They sat in silence for a while. She watched the flames. He watched her boots dry. Frank had come to Rollins after a long cattle drive, thinking only of rest. He had not expected this. He had not expected her. Maribeth's voice was quiet. "You are a cowboy." "I am." "Work for the Bar E Ranch north of here." "My name is Franklin." She nodded. "It suits you," he chuckled. Never had a woman say that before. Maribeth smiled faintly, the first time he'd seen any light in her face. "You are the first man to speak kind to me in weeks." Frank's heart pulled in his chest. He had seen women struggle out here before. Most men turned away. But she had the look of someone still holding on to hope, even if by a thread. "You got any people back east?" She shook her head. "No one I care to write to." "All right," he said. "Then maybe you stay a while. There's a bunkhouse at the ranch. Clean, warm, you can work, earn your keep. No one will trouble you." She looked at him like he had offered her a sunrise after a month of nights. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Frank leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "Because I saw you sleeping out there, and I knew I would not sleep tonight if I left you in the cold. And because I got enough room in my life for someone who deserves better than what she got." Her eyes filled, but she blinked them dry. "I do not know what to say." He stood up, offered his hand. "Say yes." She stared at it for a long second, like that rough palm was the edge of something she had never dared believe in. Then she reached up and took it. He lifted her gently to her feet. "Come on," he said. "Let me give you a life you never dreamed you could have." She stepped closer to him, blankets still wrapped around her shoulders, and nodded. "All right, Franklin." He smiled, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like more than just a gesture. It felt like the start of something real. The wagon rattled over rutted ground as the sun crested the eastern range, casting long shadows across the sagebrush. Franklin held the reins steady, his hat dipped low against the glare. Beside him on the bench, Maribeth sat wrapped in a patched wool shawl he'd borrowed from the cookhouse, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She hadn't asked where they were headed, not once. She just rode quiet, hands folded in her lap, like she was afraid any wrong word might undo the fragile kindness she'd been shown. About an hour out from Rollins, the land opened into low swells of grass and wind-scoured stone. Antelope moved in the distance, their white rumps flashing like signals across the earth. "This country's different than what you're used to?" Franklin asked, keeping his voice low. Maribeth nodded. "I grew up near the Ohio River. Lots of trees, wet summers. I never saw land that went on like this. Most folks feel small in it first time through. I don't mind feeling small," she said. "Not if I'm free." He didn't press her on what she meant by that. The way she said it, like she'd earned every inch of her own soul back one hard scrap at a time, told him enough. Midday, they crossed a shallow creek half frozen at the edges. Franklin let the horses drink before guiding them up a cut-bank trail that wound toward a stand of cottonwoods. The ranch sat beyond a modest spread with 3 buildings arranged around a fenced paddock. A smokehouse leaned slightly west, and a windmill spun slow in the breeze. "Bar E," Franklin said, gesturing with a tilt of his chin. "Ain't much, but it's steady." Maribeth didn't answer right away. She took in the barn, the hitch posts, the stacked wood by the porch. Then, quietly, "It's more than I expected I'd see again." He hopped down, tied off the team, and offered his hand. This time she took it without hesitation, letting him steady her as she stepped to the ground. Inside, the cookhouse smelled of stewed beans and baking bread. An older woman in a flour-dusted apron looked up from the stove and blinked. "You bring in strays now, Elridge?" she asked, not unkindly. "She's got a name," he said, "and she'll be earning her keep same as anyone." Maribeth stepped forward. "I can sew, wash, mend boots, and keep books if you've got ledgers. I don't need charity." The woman studied her a beat, then nodded once. "Name's Alma. You'll bunk in the back room for now." "We rise early." "I don't sleep late," Maribeth replied. That earned a small grunt of approval from Alma, who handed her a tin plate. "Eat first, then we'll see about chores." Later that evening, Franklin stepped out to the paddock. The light was going gold, slanting across the hills. He heard quiet footsteps behind him and turned to find Maribeth watching the clouds gather along the far ridge. "I thought maybe you'd regret it," she said. "Bringing me." He leaned against the fence rail, arms folded. "I don't take in folks out of pity." "What then?" "I've seen people lose themselves out here. You hadn't. That counts." She looked down at her hands. "You don't know me, not yet." They stood like that for a while, the silence not heavy but waiting. A hawk circled overhead, its cry sharp and distant. "I used to want a little bookshop," she said after a while. "One with a bell over the door and a pot of tea on a stove in the back. I used to draw it out in my journal." Franklin didn't smile. He just nodded, like he could see it laid out in front of them. "You still might," he said. She turned her head, surprised. "You believe that?" "I believe in work. And in second chances." She exhaled, slow and even, like something inside her had been holding its breath for too long. "I don't know what this place is yet," she said, "but I'm not afraid of it." "You don't need to be," he said. "So long as I'm here." Her gaze lingered on him a moment longer before she turned back to the landscape. The air was cooling fast and the sky deepened to indigo. Franklin stayed beside her, not touching, not rushing. just present. A man used to silence, letting it stretch between them like a promise not yet spoken but already understood. Maribeth swept the porch with long, steady strokes, her sleeves rolled to the elbow and her braid tucked beneath a kerchief. The wind carried the smell of distant cattle and the dry sweetness of hay. The boards beneath her boots creaked softly with each pass, a rhythm she found grounding. Inside, Alma's voice carried faintly as she directed two of the younger ranch hands through the midday meal. Maribeth had spent the morning separating dried beans and folding laundry still warm from the line. The work was plain, but it filled her hands and left little room for the throb of memory. She paused at the edge of the porch, studying the horizon. The hills wore their late autumn gold and a hawk hung motionless above the ridge. She set the broom aside and sat on the steps, pulling her shawl close. A few yards off, Franklin approached from the barn, his shirt damp with sweat and dust clinging to his trousers. He carried a bridle looped over one shoulder and a rasp in hand. He didn't speak right away, just lowered himself onto the steps beside her, letting the rasp rest across his knees. "You ever fix a horseshoe?" he asked after a moment. She shook her head. "Would you want to learn?" Maribeth considered that, tilting her face toward the sun. "I wouldn't mind knowing how," he nodded. "Could use another pair of hands in the forge come spring." She glanced at him. "You thinking I'll still be here in spring?" Franklin didn't look at her when he answered. "I'd like you to be." The quiet between them shifted, not heavy, but weightier than before. "I've never known a man to speak plain like you do," she said. "Most where I come from talk in circles, or not at all." Franklin reached down and pulled a stalk of dry grass from beside the steps, rolling it between his fingers. "I've learned a thing or two from watching cattle. They don't bluff. They don't pretend. They feel what they feel and show it. Seems decent enough to follow." Maribeth smiled, a small one, but it reached the corners of her eyes this time. "You ever been married?" "No. Why not?" He turned the stalk once more before answering. "Didn't find anyone I wanted to build something with." "Not until now." She looked down at her hands, then back at the land. The wind caught the hem of her shawl and tugged it softly. "I used to think I'd have children," she said. "A house with a wooden gate, herbs hanging from the rafters, music in the evenings, not fancy, just full." Franklin rested his arms on his thighs. "You still could." Her fingers tightened in the wool of her shawl. "There's a part of me that doesn't trust this. Not because of you, just I've waited for a hand to be offered before and it always got pulled back." He didn't reach for her. Didn't try to close the space between them. Instead, he said, "I don't make promises I won't keep, and I won't pull back." They sat like that until the sun dropped lower, casting long shadows across the yard. The rasp on Franklin's knee gleamed dully in the light. Behind them, Alma called out that supper was ready. The door creaked open and the warmth of stew and bread drifted onto the porch. Maribeth stood first. "I'll help serve." Franklin rose beside her. "I'll wash up." As they stepped inside, she glanced at him over her shoulder. "If you mean to teach me smithing, you'll have to be patient. I'm not quick with tools." "I'm not in a hurry," he said. "We've got time." And for the first time since she'd arrived, she believed it. The forge smelled of iron and ash, and the heat welled up from the coals like breath from the earth itself. Maribeth stood just outside the doorway, sleeves rolled and hair bound tight, watching Franklin shape a length of metal against the anvil. His hammer rose and fell with slow precision, each strike ringing steady and low. She stepped in when he paused to adjust the tongs. "You said I could learn." Franklin wiped his brow with the back of his hand. "You ready now?" "I've watched long enough," she said. "I'd rather know by doing." He gestured to the second apron hanging on the hook. "Then suit up." The leather hung heavy on her shoulders, but she didn't complain. He placed a horseshoe blank in her hand and showed her how to angle it on the anvil's horn. Her grip faltered at first, but she steadied. He didn't correct her with words, just lined his hand beside hers, letting the shape of his work guide her. "You've got strong wrists," he said after a while. Maribeth looked up, surprised. "You think so? I can tell by the way you hold the tongs. You don't let the weight pull you." "I had to carry water a half-mile when I was younger," she said. "Twice a day. Guess it left its mark." Franklin nodded once, then moved to the bellows. "That sort of thing teaches a person how to last." She fed the coals while he talked her through the shaping of the curve. The air thickened with smoke and the sharp tang of scorched iron. Her arms ached, but she didn't stop. When they stepped outside again, the cold hit her skin like a wave. She peeled off the apron, flexing her fingers. "You didn't tell me it'd be like wrestling a mule," she muttered. "You didn't ask," he said, and the corner of his mouth lifted. She glanced at him sidelong. "You laugh much, Franklin." He looked out toward the pasture where cattle stood motionless against the wind. "Used to, not so much these past few years." "What changed?" He didn't answer right away. "Then my brother died in '73. He was the one who brought me west. Taught me every rope knot I know and how to read the weather by the way birds fly. After he passed, I kept working. Just didn't see much reason to say more than needed." Maribeth's voice softened. "Was it sudden?" "Typhoid. Caught it in Fort Bridger. I rode 3 days to get there, but he was gone by the time I arrived." She was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry, Franklin." He gave a short nod. "He was a good man, better than me in most ways." "I don't believe that," she said. He glanced at her. "Why not?" "Because I've seen how you carry things. Quiet don't mean empty." They walked back toward the main house, their steps matching without thought. A breeze stirred the last leaves on the cottonwoods. "Alma's got stew again," Franklin said. "You hungry?" "I could eat," Maribeth replied. "But I'll help serve first." "You don't have to earn every bite," he said. "I know," she said. "But I want to." He stopped at the porch, hand on the rail. "Maribeth," she turned halfway toward him. Her face was flushed from the forge, her eyes steady. "I'm glad you're here," he said. "Not just at the ranch. Here." She looked up at him, the wind pulling loose one strand of hair from beneath her scarf. "I am too." Neither moved for a long breath. Then she stepped past him into the house and he followed, the door closing behind them with a soft thump against the wind. The first frost held overnight, glinting silver on the paddock rails and turning the troughs to thin glass. Franklin rose early to mend a split harness, but Maribeth was already at the pump, sleeves damp, knuckles raw from breaking ice to draw water. She didn't see him approach until his shadow stretched beside her. "You don't need to be out here this early," he said, voice still husky from sleep. Maribeth straightened slowly, her breath visible in the crisp air. The kettle was near empty, and Alma's got sourdough rising. "She'll want it soon." He took the bucket from her hands, not as a gesture of rescue but of rhythm, like he meant to carry her burdens without asking for thanks. "Come with me when I ride out," he said after a moment. "East pasture. There's fence line needs checking." She studied him. "You sure?" "I wouldn't ask if I wasn't." They rode out after breakfast. The horses moved quiet through the brittle grass, their breath steaming in the cold. A pair of magpies flitted through the cottonwoods, their wings flashing black and blue. Maribeth rode a roan mare Franklin had gentled himself, and though she didn't yet sit the saddle like someone born to it, she didn't shy from the sway of the ground or the wind in her face. At the break in the fence, Franklin dismounted first. Barbed wires sagged here. Might be elk come through again. Maribeth crouched beside him, fingers brushing the trampled grass. "Tracks are wide, heavy. You think they'll be back," he shrugged. "Could be." Or they moved further east into the hills. They worked in tandem, pulling the wire taut with gloved hands, hammering staples into the weathered post. Maribeth's breath came hard, but she didn't pause. When the last staple was set, Franklin stepped back and dusted his palms. "I've been thinking about something," he said, eyes on the fence line. She stayed crouched, watching him. "What is it?" "I've got a parcel of land near the creek. Was meant to build on it years ago." He shifted his weight. "Never had cause to." Maribeth stood, brushing her skirt clean. "And now, I'm thinking I do." She didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted to the horizon where the land rolled gentle and wide. "What would you build there?" "A house," he said. "Small to start. Room for books. Room for a table set for two." Maribeth's throat worked, but her voice didn't falter. "You asking me to share it?" "I am." She stepped closer. "I need to know it's not just shelter you're offering." "It's not," he said. "I want the rest of my days with you. However many come." Her gloved hand brushed the edge of his coat. "I've never had a man offer me that without expecting something I couldn't give." "I expect nothing but your company," he said, "and your truth." She looked up at him, eyes steady. "Then yes. I'll build it with you." They didn't kiss then, not yet, but something passed between them in that cold air, a warmth that had nothing to do with fire or sun. They returned to the ranch just after dusk. Alma met them at the gate, brow drawn. "I heard from the post rider." "Maribeth, there's a letter came for you." Maribeth frowned. "No one writes me." Alma handed it over. The writing was unfamiliar. She broke the seal with careful fingers. Franklin waited, silent beside her. After a long pause, she folded the letter and tucked it into her apron. "It's from my brother's wife. She's widowed now, wants to know if I'll come east and keep house for her." Franklin didn't move, but something in his jaw tightened. Maribeth's voice was even. "I won't reply." "You sure?" he asked quietly. "I've found something different here." She looked up. "Something mine." He nodded. They married in the spring beneath the cottonwoods, with Alma as witness and a pair of ranch hands holding up a split-rail gate covered in wildflowers. Franklin wore a clean shirt and his best boots. Maribeth wore a dress of dark blue calico she'd sewn herself, and a ribbon Franklin had once seen her fold carefully into her dresser drawer. Afterward, they walked the path to the creek, where the new house stood half-built, the frame solid, the windows open to the scent of pine and thawing soil. Franklin carried her across the threshold not because it was tradition, but because he wanted to feel her in his arms, weight and all, as they stepped into the life they had shaped together. Inside, the hearth was already warm, the kettle already humming. Maribeth set her hand to the wall, eyes full of quiet pride. "It's ours," she said. Franklin stood behind her, arms around her waist. "And always will be." They built slowly, season by season, adding shelves for books, planting herbs along the back stoop, hanging a bell above the door that chimed soft when the wind turned. Maribeth stitched new curtains every winter and read aloud by lamplight. Franklin came in from the barn each evening with dust on his boots and his heart already reaching for her. They did not speak often of the past. But sometimes, when the wind howled over the ridge or the sky darkened with snow, he would take her hand in his and say, "You're not alone." And she would answer without fear, "I know." Years passed, and the ranch grew, and the land folded them into its rhythm. They grew older, never apart. And in the quiet hours before dawn, when the world held its breath between one day and the next, they often woke beside each other, hands still joined, hearts still steady, and knew without speaking that they had finally come home.